Hey, friends. Joe Hill was executed 105 years ago today. So I figured I'd come out here on the porch. It's a little bit of a windy day and tell you guys a very personal story of mine about Joe Hill. Now, I had a German radio crew doing a documentary on Joe Hill approach me here recently, and they asked me to share this story. I'd never told it publicly before, and I felt kind of weird about it. But I asked Billy Bragg permission, and he encouraged me to go ahead and tell the story. So I told it to them, and I figure I might as well tell it to you guys here. Our story begins at the Aladdin Theater in Portland, Oregon, maybe 12, 13 years ago. And I was touring with Billy Bragg. We just played a great show, and everybody had left. It was dark out, and we're standing in the street outside the Aladdin Theater, just swapping road stories. Somebody mentions Joe Hill, and Billy says, I got a good Joe Hill story for you. And I said, really? So he starts telling me this story. For those of you who don't know who Joe Hill was, the easiest way I can think to describe him would be in the same way that people would say that Bob Dylan was the next Woody Guthrie. You might say that Woody Guthrie was the next Joe Hill. You know, he's the grandfather of all folk singers. People have sung about him and sung his songs throughout the years, like Paul Robeson, Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, even Bruce Springsteen, and Phil Ochs would sing about and sing his songs. But he was a labor organizer in a time when it was a horrible time to work in factories in America, a horrible time. The working conditions were, you can't describe how bad they were. And there were young children in these factories, and people like Joe Hill, fought to get us things, crazy ideas like the 8-hour workday, or the weekend, and just safer working conditions. But it was, he would organize people for the industrial workers of the world, the IWW, or they're also called the Wobblies. And they are the people that brought us the 8-hour workday. And they believed in organizing people across race. It didn't matter what color your skin was. It didn't matter what your religion was. It didn't matter what your sex was or what your nationality. They believed that you were a worker and you should be represented in this one big union. And that's what Joe Hill believed. And he would travel around and try to organize people as he's singing songs and working side by side in the mines with them. And he was in Park City, Utah, just outside of Salt Lake City, organizing people. This was extremely dangerous at the time because the mine owners controlled the local police and the local government. So if you were organizing people, you had the full power of the state and the police coming down to get you. And Joe Hill, got caught in that. And he was arrested for a trumped up murder charge. He was completely railroaded. There were protests all across America and even overseas to try to get Joe Hill released. And President Woodrow Wilson sent the governor a note asking him to pardon Joe Hill, but they didn't. And they executed Joe Hill by firing squad as the sun came up in Sugar House Park. Now, Billy Bragg is telling me this, and he's saying when Joe Hill was executed, his last will stated he didn't want to be caught dead in Utah, so they needed to get his body outside of Utah. So they shipped his body to Chicago, and there was parades as his coffin came through the streets of people cheering, Joe Hill and mourning him one last time, and he ended up being cremated, and the Wobblies took his ashes and sent them to union offices in every state in America and even abroad, except for Utah, because he didn't want to be caught dead in Utah. He was executed in 1915. In 1918, his ashes were sitting in an office. It was the IWW office in Chicago. And his ashes were so dangerous that the FBI seized everything in the office, seizing the ashes also. And they were locked away in some storeroom somewhere in Washington, D.C. for the next 70 years. And sometime in the late 80s, his ashes became declassified, and they sent them back to Chicago to the IWW offices. And there became this question amongst the labor movement. Like I said, this is what Billy's telling me outside in the street at the Aladdin Theater. There became this question amongst the labor movement. What do we do with Joe Hill's ashes? These are the last remaining ashes that we know of? What do we do with them? Now, Abby Hoffman, of all people, started writing articles, and he had this idea that he believed the Joe Hills of today, people like Billy Bragg, should agree to eat Joe Hill's ashes, these last remaining parts, and then when they die, they'll be cremated, and the Joe Hills of tomorrow will eat their ashes, and Joe Hill's spirit will live on in that way. And Billy Bragg, this is him telling me all of this, standing out in the street outside the Aladdin Theater. I've got my jaw open at this moment. But he says he's playing, I believe it was 1989, somewhere in Chicago, and his road manager says, the Wobblies are here and they want to see you, Billy. He said, we'll bring them backstage. So his two Wobblies come in. I believe it was Jeff Ditz and is it Mark Kaufman? I hope I got you names right, guys. I'm sorry if I didn't. But they walk backstage and they say, I guess you probably know why we're here. And Billy says, I think I have a pretty good idea why you're here. And they pull out this packet of ashes and they say, these are Joe Hill's ashes, and we would like for you to eat them. And Billy paused for a minute and said, all right. And he took the packet of ashes and he ate them and washed them down with a Union beer. I don't know what beer that was, but I bet it was a good one. And he saved some of the ashes for someone down the road who he might give them to. He kept them in a little red songbook, which is a collection of Joe Hill songs that the Wobblies would pass out. This particular songbook is the one he kept the ashes in. And we fast forward probably 5 or 6 years. I'd toured with Billy a few different times. He is an absolute beautiful man. When I talk about people being real and genuine and just great people in this music world, Billy's at the top of that list. I really, really mean that. He's a beautiful man. I've toured with him a few times. At one time I spent 30 days in a van with him. You spend 30 days in a van with somebody, you kind of end up knowing who they really are. And so I have these opinions about Billy from being around him that much. He's a beautiful man. This is awkward, and I apologize if I stumble through this, but I'm sitting in Billy's kitchen in England, and we're talking about Joe Hill, and he walks in the other room, and he comes in, and he's got Joe Hill's ashes, like the last remaining part of it. And he says, Otis, I've been holding on to these for 20 years, trying to think of somebody who might be right to eat them, and I think you're the person. Will you eat what we believed at the time to be the last remaining parts of Joe Hill's ashes? And I thought about it, it's like, man, I don't deserve this. I'm not the right guy. But I love Joe Hill, and his beliefs line up very much like mine. I thought, what the hell? So I ate the ashes. He made some tea. I washed it down with some tea, and it's not as cool as Union beer, but I was in England, and it was really gritty, like sand, little bitty rocks. And somebody later asked me what it tasted like, and said it tasted like solidarity. But the story does not end there. Probably quite a few years later, I knew the 100th anniversary of his execution was coming up. This is just 5 years ago now. And I had some time off, and Amy's brother lived in Salt Lake City at the time, and his wife, and we hadn't seen them. So we planned a trip where we would go out there and we could visit them, and I could be in Sugar House Park, the spot where Joe Hill was executed, like 100 years to the moment. I could be there. So we traveled out there. I want to say Duncan Phillips, who was Utah Phillips' son. Duncan's become a really good friend of mine. I love Duncan. And I absolutely love Utah Phillips' music. I think that he is the greatest storyteller of his generation. But, Duncan lives there in Salt Lake City, and he arranged a memorial show for Joe Hill. And it was the night before. And a nice venue, really good time, good vibes, good people. A lot of great artists played it, and I got to play that. Duncan brought out his dad's guitar, his Utah Phillips guitar. Now, throughout the years, some of these packets of ashes got spread around to different songwriters, and one of these people was Utah Phillips, and he supposedly put it in his guitar So I got to play the guitar that had some of Joe Hill's ashes in it at the time. And it was beautiful, a wonderful evening. And then the morning, I got up really early to go to Sugar House Park on the morning of the anniversary of his execution. I show up before the sun rises, and there's probably maybe 40 or 50 people from all over the country and from all over the world. There were people from Gävle, Sweden, where Joe Hill was from, that were there. 40 or 50 of us all gathered around, and as the sun came up, we all, stood there silently as the 100-year mark came upon us of when Joe Hill was executed. So exactly 100 years to the moment, I was standing in the spot where he was executed. And we stood there. It was a beautiful calmness about everything, a little bit of a breeze. It's a beautiful park now. It was a prison then. And we sang a couple Joe Hill songs. A few people said some words. I stood there quietly and tried to blend in, and then we all went on about our business. So today is the 105th anniversary, and I really encourage you guys to look up Joe Hill. He was a very important part of music history and American history. And I will say, everything that I've said to you is true in spirit, and I think most of it is completely factual. At least all of the parts that involve me and Billy are factual. There are people who have spent their entire lives studying Joe Hill, and they might be able to chip away at the margins, and I think you should look to them for, the most factual account of things. But I'm telling you my personal story here, and it feels good to get it off my chest and tell it to you guys. I hope you guys will look up Joe Hill's music and look up his importance, and take care of each other. Much love to y'all, and here's to better days.